Okay, we are live once more. Another month has passed, and Bruno and I are going to do a little recap. How are you, Bruno?
I am doing great. It's amazing. The month has gone by really quickly. This month was my birthday month. I finally
Happy,
turned
happy belated
27.
birthday.
Thank you very much. And so I'm excited about that. We'll talk later about what I bought for myself for my birthday. But that's been a big deal in my family. And then, of course, I had a ton of events that I participated in. So it was the scene of a lot of conversations around data exchanges and the future of data and so forth. So I'll have a lot to talk about. But you received your book, right? So that was a big month
I
for you as well.
I have my new book here. I'm so excited. Extended reality in practice. So this is has officially launched in Europe now, and it will launch in the US, I think, in mid-June. So
So I
I'm
want to
so, but
ask you a little
it's
bit
all
about that. I
sorry.
want to ask you about what made you write this book. I mean, 100 plus amazing stories. I mean, tell us more about what's going on there in the extended reality world. What does that even mean?
Yeah, so extended reality captures both augmented and virtual reality and mixed reality. So this is all about how we extend the reality that we live in. So the very simple examples are things like virtual backgrounds we put onto our Zooms and team chats, to the way we now look at new things. Like if you wanted to buy a new iPhone, you can now use the augmented reality capabilities of your phone to place the phone right in front of you, and then you can zoom in and zoom out and walk around it using the camera of your phone as if it was real. A really cool example of augmented reality is Google is putting a lot of effort into this at the moment. And if you, for example, search for dinosaurs like Tyrannosaurus Rex, for example, you have the option of having this in virtual reality and in augmented reality. And then you can actually place this in front of you and have this animal life moving in your room, which is pretty cool. So my kids love this sort of stuff, and I think makes our world more immersive. And obviously for brands, it is really interesting what they can now do. You can now bring wine labels to life, for example, by having an augmented reality code on the label. You simply point your camera on it and you see it. Has huge implications for things like travel, for example. If you think about this, I just recorded a video the other day of how augmented and virtual reality is now changing the travel industry. So augmented reality, obviously using your device. Virtual reality is when you have a headset like this one in on you, and then you obviously go into the completely digital world. And so, for example, if you are thinking about going to a resort in Mexico on holiday, and hopefully one day we will be able to do this again, you can um, put your headset on and you can actually go to that place and explore the resort and see what it actually looks like, what it feels like. You can, when you go to your destination, you can then test drive excursions, for example. There are a number of hotels in Dubai, for example, where you can see what a diving excursion actually feels like, looks like before you do it, which is pretty cool. Or even if you have, like, I quite often take we take my wife's mum with us on holiday, and she wouldn't go diving with us, but she could then virtually do the same trip, and we can still talk over dinner about a similar experience.
Oh, so there's
And
a way for these experiences to be inclusive. That's really interesting. Do you think this was accelerated by what we're going through right now, this acceptance
yeah,
of virtual
I
worlds
think
like this?
so. I think so, yeah. What we've seen a huge acceleration in all technologies. I think what we've seen in virtual reality is that it, because it requires new hardware, I don't think they've caught the wave as well. In augmented
Hmm.
reality, absolutely, because one of my favorite examples is a is glasses manufacturer and retail, Warby Parker. So when the pandemic shut all the shops down and people didn't want to go into shops to try on lots of different glasses, or people didn't want to go to a makeup counter and have makeup shades tried on their skin, you can now all do this virtually. It's a bit like a Snapchat filter. And I was talking to Bolly, the French glasses manufacturer, yesterday. They are now using really cool technology. They're using Snapchat filters to help you try on the different glasses, with their ski goggles or sunglasses. And their ski goggles also change, obviously, the shading, and you can even try this now out in augmented reality. So you can look at look through the camera lens of your phone, and you see what shading actually is created by the effect of the sunglasses, and they use AI to do this, which is pretty epic.
Now, of
So
course, there is the how you see things, but this relates to a piece that you wrote this past month on how you smell things, right? To recreate the full experience. So, what's going on here? I see Genevieve is saying, "How are we reaching the metaverse?" I mean, I'm not sure if I'd go that far, but it's interesting the types of technologies now being developed in order to just truly recreate. I mean, if you think about life the way we experience it today, you could say, how much of this is created a part of as part of our brain versus how much of that is actually true, actually existing, right? I don't want to
is
go all the way to the matrix, but is there technology now enough to create vivid experiences to a point that they're just as real as reality? And so
I
tell
think
us a
we
little bit about that noise, that smell
I I
technology that you wrote about.
I think we're getting close to this. The digital nose. So this company called Aribol, another French company that is creating this digital nose, is so fascinating for me. In the use cases that in the future you will have the sense of smell built into your devices, whether they
Yeah.
are glasses or your smartphones. I was actually spending quite a lot of time this month building my own avatar. So this is, I'm sure many of you have seen the deep fakes of people.
Yeah.
And so I went into a film studio, had myself filmed, and I'm working with a company called Synthesia, and they have now created my own avatar. So, and they have this really cool platform where you can create videos. So this is something I'm so excited about. So this, hopefully, next month people will see the first videos of this, of the virtual me appearing on YouTube. And the beauty of this is that they have, I'm not exactly sure how many, but let's say they have 20 different languages or even more. So I just yesterday I created a little video of myself speaking in Spanish and speaking in Chinese, and this is completely crazy. And so at the moment, the way it would work is that I record, either type in text, and then the virtual avatar, I then choose a voice for this avatar, and it then speaks in the video with my movements, the text I put in. So this is a great way of distributing my content in video format. But I can also record my voice and send it, upload it, and then it will speak my actual voice. And even cooler, that they are now building an integration with some of the text to speech platforms. So the one I'm using is a company called Descript. And so again, I spent a few hours training this AI to be able to speak in my voice. And now I simply type the text in, it then speaks it in my voice. I then upload this into the video platform. It then looks like I'm actually speaking this, and none of this ever happened, which is pretty crazy stuff. So I
Because
was
you
showing.
speak fluent German and fluent English, but you don't actually speak Chinese, right?
I
You
don't
don't know a
know.
single word of Chinese.
I I did actually study Chinese for a few years at university, but I forgot everything. So I
Oh,
can say ni hao and wo hen hao, but that's about it. So
That's
yes,
incredible. Oh, it's Andy's asking here, what was the name of the avatar company?
is Synthesia.
Synthesia. Okay, well, we've got quite a few people here. Notice people from New York, people from France. Fabien. Good morning,
Yeah,
Fabien.
it's
Fabien,
always
I'm having a French breakfast, so you'll be happy about that because it is, let's see, what time is it in California? 8:10. So
yes.
who
Is
else do we have?
the end of the day, and today is the start of school holidays as well here. So my children have just come home and they now have a week off school, which is nice. So the
Oh, just
pace,
a week because it's not the beginning of the summer.
no, it's half term. So the
Wow. Okay. So
summer break
my
starts
kids are
in.
done.
Oh,
Both
really?
my son who's in high school is done, and my daughter's in college is going to be done, I think, this week. So
Wow.
starting next week, everybody's doing camps and um, new jobs and things like that.
Very good. So
What
what
else
have you
happened
been?
in the? Oh,
What
go
else
ahead. Go ahead.
have you been up to? I was just while
Yeah,
I'm thinking about what I've been up to. What have you
lots of
been
stuff.
writing, reading, anything interesting?
Yes, yeah. So there is something I think will probably be very interesting to people that are interested in the data and analytics world. Um, I launched a survey at the beginning of the month that ended up being really, really popular. Where working with customers every day, I noticed that the makeup of a traditional organization, say a large bank or a large retailer that was maybe founded 200 years ago, 300 years ago, is fundamentally different from a digital native organization that maybe was started 10 years ago and so forth. So that's kind of obvious, but what I mean by the makeup, I don't mean just the way they think about the business. I think about the makeup of their employee footprint. And so one of the things I realized is that some of the organizations that are truly digital native, data native, and innovating with data, they might have more uh, data engineers and data scientists and so forth. So I put this survey out there asking the community, what do you think is the right number of employees, data employees inside your organization? How many should you have? When do you know that you're actually equipped to innovate beyond the technology itself? How many people should you have?
Hmm.
And so it's interesting because the survey, I gave people the choice of less than 5%, more than 10%, less than 25%. And it's interesting because the answer wasn't straight. People really don't know how to think about that problem. Kirk Bourne is probably the person that reframed the question the best, where he basically explained there's three levels of data people. There are people that are, data literate. So basically, they understand data, they can work with data, and so forth. There are people that are data fluent, meaning they are building dashboards and they are driving decision making through data driven applications, and so forth. And then there's the data experts who themselves are data scientists and so forth. And he was just basically giving me a breakdown of what percentage it should be. There's also this great data engineer from GitHub who suggested the number should be 8%. And so what's interesting about it is I got tens of thousands of people engaging in this survey. And it's interesting because I think I might have pushed on a nerve here where we don't really have a good answer to this question, which is kind of interesting when you think about innovating with data. We've been talking a lot for decades about the technology, but we haven't really thought about what's the mass of people that we should. Of course, the data scientist is important, but how many should you have? And what should be the proportions? So how many data scientists to business analysts, and how many business analysts to information workers do you need to have? It doesn't seem to be a blueprint on that, and so that's been
I
super popular.
it, it is interesting, and I think it depends on the industry. It depends on the organization itself and how important data is. If you think about a startup in the data space, most of the people will be data people. If you look at traditional companies, they need a data science team. But at the same time, you can, I guess, look at data skills much wider. So one of the things we did when we created the data strategy for Shell is that they realized actually they wanted everyone in the organization to be a data person. So they needed to
Mm,
upskill the entire organization, and their whole future vision is that they completely democratize the use of analytics, so everyone, any business person, is able to use analytics without having to resort to a specific data person. And if you think about this whole the future of no code analytics, that is definitely the way forward to some extent. uh,
yeah, it really. I think the mistake that people I think tend to make is they look at younger organization that was born in data, where they have very little legacy and they can attract talent, and they look at that as the blueprint for, okay, this is how my company should behave. But I think your point on, no, these organizations are different, they have different customers, they have different legacies, they have different types of employees, they have a different level of maturity, even if they are in the same industry. And so I think it's really what we learned from the survey is that it really is a personal choice. It really is, there isn't a one size fit all answer to it. It really is, up to the CEOs and the executives of the company to kind of lay out, okay, this is where the functions we should invest in, and how much data needs to be a competitive advantage for organization, and how many people we need to hire for that function. So it's really interesting. I'm curious to see if the community has strong opinions on this, because um, the answer has not been, the code hasn't been cracked yet on that. And so I can see we got
Yeah.
lots of people come across the world, from Africa and Ghana and then Brazil and then uh, North America and so forth. So I'm sure there's a lot of diversity here of people of different opinions that could tell us a little bit how they feel.
Yeah, so Andreas was just asking about the company that I mentioned. So it was Descript. Yes, you spelled it right in answering your own question. Yes, and I came across Descript when I was recording the audio for an online course, for a Udemy course that I was creating on data strategy. And because I'm obviously not, I don't know how to edit voice and sound data, so I found myself, I realized I'm actually not very good at this, so I had to re-record my script many times, and I found it really time consuming then to edit this. And what I found with Descript is that they have this really cool software that you simply upload your sound file to their platform. It then automatically transcribes it for you, so it gives you a Word document, and then you simply edit the Word document. So you take out repetitive words, you can automatically take out any ums and ahs and everything else, and then you simply re-upload it and you have a ready-made file. And what their software basically created this artificial voice part of it, because they said if you have said the wrong word, so you wanted instead of big data you wanted to use artificial intelligence, you simply change the word in a Word document, and then you can use your own voice then to blend it in, so it can edit your voice, which is pretty cool. And you can use this for video as well.
And what is the training like? I mean, how much do you have to do in order to create the blueprint, or the
Yeah, I
your
think.
identity, your voice identity?
Yeah, and I'm just for my new avatar, I'm just redoing it because I have a new setting and a new microphone and a slightly different. So I hopefully will do this better. But I think I recorded for about an hour.
Wow.
They give you a script and you just read that script. So it was pretty cool.
That's pretty exceptional. Now we have
Mm,
technology that could just basically figure out your voice in
mm,
60 minutes.
yeah,
That's
I was
interesting
actually
and scary at the same time.
this morning I was talking to another startup called Lovo, and they basically are building a very similar platform. So they're building this voice over platform, and very similar. So they will give me access to their platform, and I will try this out soon. And but they are, what was interesting, I was talking to the founder Tom Lee, and he um what they're now doing is they're also building emotion into their platform. So if you wanted to have laughter or excitement in your voice, because I think lots of voices at the moment still feel quite robotic because they don't
Yeah.
know your emotions that you want to portray, and they are now trying to figure out what user interface you actually need to use for this. So how do you make it easy for people to make their voice more excited, less excited, laughing, sad, whatever they need? And what impressed me so much with their platform is that they are also now able to create a singing voice. So
Oh wow.
basically they they record your singing voice using again a script, and then you upload the text that you want this person to sing, and you upload
Mhm.
the notes, so the code for the song that you want them to sing, and then the AI will automatically create a song that sounds pretty cool. So the interview I did with Tom is going to go onto my YouTube channel hopefully next week, so you can all see this. And there's a demo of the platform as well, which is pretty cool.
That's amazing. Maybe we'll have a shot at being good singers. Who knows?
I know there's hope for me. Maybe.
Well, Mike Nash, returning listener here. So Mike actually contributed last time when we were talking about the 5S model, and he's saying an avatar of Bernard and Bruno, the real forms are enough to handle for now. I agree. That's what my wife says. The world is good with one version of me. Thanks, Mike. You know,
Yeah,
in the same realm, there's a technology that was interesting this month. And this is not about creating experiences that don't exist. This is about making digital experiences a lot better. It's a project called Starline. So if you Google that, take a look at that project. It's really interesting. It's basically the use of camera and new hardware and new technology to create dimensional impressions of a meeting. So you and I, instead of being in a flat screen like this, would actually have some sense of depth, where we would feel like, even though we're not really in the same room, we would feel like are about in the same room. And so I think, COVID certainly accelerated innovation in this field. And so this is super interesting, I think, to watch, as ultimately we'll get better technology to make our lives a lot easier and more productive. The thing that's happened for me, at least in COVID land, and I'm sure it's true for you as well, is I've realized, some of these meetings that we do and these trips that we do, it would take a huge toll traveling 10 hours for, a day worth of meetings. And sometimes, I'm not sure that it's worth that much. And so I think now we're kind of learning, okay, what are the instances where it truly is worth it to travel? And what are the instances where, but with better technology like this, we can get to 80%. That's probably enough to not have to get on the plane and travel and be away from your family and all that.
I agree,
stuff.
and this is what I did. You asked me earlier why I wrote extended reality in practice, and the reason I wrote this is because I believe that this is another technology that's just on the cusp of becoming a transformative technology that will change so many different aspects of our lives. So in the book, I talk about how we use it in education, how we use it in businesses for meetings, for example, and they will become more immersive. Someone talked about the metaverse before. So this is something we will be entering. On even retail is becoming, we talked about Warby Parker, but in the future we will have much better avatars. So I now have a 2D avatar of me, that the one I was talking about earlier, that I can put on YouTube. But in the future I will have a 3D avatar of myself. And what this means is we can then properly meet up in virtual reality, and I can see you in your proper proportions and dimensions. And what is fascinating is, if you then think about the implications for retail, for example, at the moment, the only reason I would go into a retail shop, into, like, if I want to buy new jeans or new suit, is to try it on to make sure it fits properly. So in the future, you can use your digital avatar that has your exact measurements, and you can put the suit onto you or the dress in the digital world. And again, if you're standing in a changing room somewhere in a retailer, and you're buying a suit for a cocktail party or for a business meeting, you might not exactly get a feel for what this will actually feel and look like. So in the future, you can put yourself in the suit, in this dress, in the right setting, and look at it from all angles to see that you're happy with it. And
I have to make a joke here, Bernard, because my avatar is going to have to be dynamic, because I think over the last few months, it's kind of went up and down here. So maybe I need to have like little sensors, so the avatar stays accurate. So if I did my avatar a year ago, then a little different from what it is now.
No, same here. I'm working on it.
The one thing I will tell you is that talking about proportions, as you know, because you've met me in person, obviously I'm 5'5". So, but I will tell you that if we talk about talking digitally being the amazing equalizer, I'm afraid what's going to happen when I meet people in person that I've actually never met, but I've worked with and collaborated with, where they probably have this impression from talking to me in Zoom and in GVCs and and programs like this where they think I'm probably taller than what I am. So, and they have a view of myself that is
Mm.
camera down. In fact, they probably are going to need to look at me this way because most people are taller than I am. So that's going to be an interesting rediscovering the physical proportions of people you work with is going to be an interesting one.
Yeah, and it's interesting that in the virtual world, you can then be anything you want to. I don't know whether you watched Ready Player One, which for me
Yeah.
is a great movie that it really showcases what will soon be possible. I mean, if you look at what Facebook is developing with their Horizon platform, this is a virtual social media platform that will offer you anything you want. And obviously you can have a real avatar of yourself, but you can also be whatever you want to be. And so
Yeah.
this is for me, I talk in the book about these blurring lines between, this is why I call it extended reality, because it is real, it blurs the boundaries of what is real and what isn't. I start the book with an example of if you have really nice augmented reality glasses that are definitely coming along very nicely from a number of vendors, um, you can then change the world you're looking at. So, for example, if you don't like the paint job your neighbor has done on their house and you don't like yellow, you simply change it into whatever color you like. And when you have your glasses on, this is what you will see. So it's an interesting world that we're entering where you have to really think about what is reality and what isn't, and this we will see increasing blending of the digital and the real to
I
enhance.
love what you said. This is a great segue into a book that was published this month that I really liked, and I feel like we've got people here that like to read books related to data decision making and reality. It's a book called The Framers, and there's a word in it. So it talks about how you think about the world and reality, and just like you said, is how we actually perceive reality. And this sentence here, I think, is a great one. We do not see things as they are, we see things as we are. So how much of how we perceive reality from our perspective, this book was written by Ken Kukier. If you remember when The Economist came out, I think you and I met him at the same event, actually. This is probably 10, 12 years ago. The Economist came out with a front page piece called The Data Deluge. And Ken is the guy who wrote that piece. And so he published this book. It's a great book, and it talks about the human dimension of decision making. Definitely something I would suggest people to take a look at.
Very good. So what's can you summarize the book for us?
Yeah. So the book really talks about, it's called A Human Advantage in the Age of Technology and Turmoil. And so basically it's about the role of human decision making, the positive side of it, and how much human decision making, how much human framing is a big part of how we make decisions. There's been, of course, a lot of movements of people believing, oh my gosh, machines are taking over, artificial intelligence can make decisions for us. And in fact, this book really kind of gives you the methodology to think, okay, how do I create frames, if you will? How do I create a way that people can learn to look at reality in the way that actually drives better decision making? So it's a great book, and it's a positive book.
Mm.
The negative version of that is another book that also came out this month, is a book called Noise. Here, I don't know if you see it here. Like, there you go. So you probably know Dan Kahneman. He's the author of Think Fast and Slow. I think he's a professor at Berkeley. He's a really well-known psychologist. And here in this book, he talks about the opposite of it, which is uh, the flaw in human judgment. And so we've got two books this month. One that's a positive one on how you frame reality and how you become aware of your own bias, and how the way you look at reality is what actually creates reality. That's the Framers. And then the other one, which is the Noise, which is how do truly avoid the negative bias that we're putting into decisions that end up being the wrong decisions. Often, we've talked about this before in this show, where we're not logical machines that make decisions, we're emotional machines that make decisions, where we commit to decision and then we go back and confirm that decision. Confirmation bias is kind of the term that is typically used here. And so this book does a great job kind of making people aware of how decisions really are made. And so
Yeah,
if people have a break and they're looking for great books for the summer, I would say these two books for sure, plus your book, of course. These should be three books that people can take to the beach when they open to read and still keep educated throughout the summer.
very good. Yeah, I don't think there are too many people that are like me that actually read those kind of books on the beach.
I haven't read a novel in years at this point. I mean, all the books I read are books like that. So I guess I don't know if makes my life sad or interesting, but I don't know. What was the last novel that you read?
No, I don't really read novels. I read business books
Yeah.
and technology books, and I read probably 2 or 3 a week. So it's
The only
is
novel I think I read was I, Robot, and even there, it's not really a novel,
mm,
right? And so, but going back to this idea of, um, digital or how would I say it? Not really physical experiences. One the big topic that came out this month in the enterprise is the topic of data fabric, and so I know this is something that you've talked about in the past, have written about. There's a great piece from IDC that discusses what is a data fabric, because it's a if you look at Gartner's research in the hype cycle, the data fabric term is at the top of the hype cycle, and what that means is that lots of people are talking about it. Everybody feels like they need one, but it's overhyped in the what actually a data fabric is and what it can do versus what the reality of a data fabric is. And so there's been a lot of papers written this month from Gartner, and there's been a great blog from IDC that explains the multiple layers of the data fabric, and they kind of break it down. I have it here right in front of me, and I think it'd be interesting to get your take on it, because they talk about what are the layers that are required in order to create a data fabric that brings value to organizations. So there's at least three layers that they see. The first one is what they call the data engineering layer, and so that's typically data integration. This is the place where you're bringing your data, and you might do this without moving the data, but you're like bringing metadata about the data into one environment so you can have visibility, observe the information, and so forth.
hmm.
The second layer is a layer called the governance data, which is now how you're controlling and applying, if you will, policy against that data. Because the whole need for the data fabric is this realization that now our data is everywhere. It's on premise, it's in clouds, and in clouds, multiple clouds, and it's in multiple formats. It's in a data lake, it's in a data warehouse, it's in a database. And so how do you apply governance to all that data without actually having to take it out of the original formats it's in? Because there's a reason for why it's in that format in the first place. And then the final layer is this intelligent layer, which is now, how do I do something with this data? So now I've discovered it, observing it. I'm now applying policy for access, and now I want to drive machine learning models. I want to engage people with analytics on top of it across all these data types and these data locations. And right now, the average enterprise has a complete operational nightmare because they have to code separately for these different silos. And I was talking to a customer who was telling me this problem is so acute that it's preventing my organization to actually work on initiatives that are moving the business forward. So this topic of data fabric is a super hot topic right now. And it's going to be an interesting one to see evolve. I mean, are you hearing a lot about that, or what's your situation on your side of the world?
Yeah, I think organizations realize that it's really important to look at it from all of these different perspectives and to make sure that there's a flow of data that can go from each of those levels and you can actually leverage it. Absolutely. Yeah, I see that too.
Yeah, and so I'll put the link to the IDC piece here, because it's not only just a definition issue, but it's also an implementation issue for most organizations. There's also an argument, of course, that you would expect this at the beginning of any technology. Should it even be called a data fabric? IDC calls it the data control plane, whereas Gartner calls it the data fabric. Regardless what you call it, I think calling attention to the problem itself is an important one, and certainly looking for solutions is a big one. So we talked a lot about data fabric this month. We also talked a lot about this other concept of data exchange. Yesterday, I was on a radio show called the DM Radio. It's Eric Kavanagh's show. It's, I think, the most syndicated data radio in the world. And we talked about the rise of data exchanges. And what's been interesting there, and many people I'm sure will relate to this, is we're realizing that, in fact, let's see here. I've got this little graphic. I don't know if you could see it. Basically, this is your data. This is your company data. And this white area here is all the data you could get access to. So basically, what we're talking about here is that not only have we had issues capturing the data inside our organization, making it available so people can analyze it, but even if you could do 100% of the data you have, it's only a small fraction of all the data that's available for you to
Mm.
create great analysis. A great example is a retailer would want to know, for instance, climate information to improve their inventory. I don't know how many stores you've walked into where 3 weeks ago it was really cold and they ordered a bunch of boots and jackets and so forth, and now you're walking in and it's 30 degrees Celsius outside, and they still have the boots because they did not incorporate the climate information. It's dynamically changing and it's not affecting how they're forecasting their inventory. And so the idea of creating infrastructure that enables people to share data and incorporate that into their internal decision making is a super hot one at the same time.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, and this is the point I make with every organization that I work with. Sometimes we look at data in this blinkered view, thinking what data have we already got in our organizations, and for many this is already a big enough challenge because less than 1% of all of the data companies have is actually ever analyzed and used, and if you then take into account all the data they could potentially access, this is vast and so valuable, especially when you combine some of the external data with your internal data to make it extra valuable. I don't know whether I've told you that story. I was working with a construction company and they wanted to have data on progress on their construction site. So they were thinking about how can they collect data from their own systems, maybe looking at supply chain, how much raw material goes into each of the sites, their project progress reports, thinking how can we use all of this data to monitor this and get a feel. And then they said their ideal wish list would be not only to have their own progress data, but being able to compare this with the construction sites of their competitors across the country. So, and they were just bogged down in just figuring out what internal data they could use. So I suggested, how about you use satellite data? Because satellite data is something that is generated every hour. There are companies selling it to you. This is hugely granular data nowadays. And you can simply use a machine learning algorithm to mark your construction site and monitor progress in real time. And this is what they're doing now. And the beauty of using satellite data is that you can not only you look at your own construction site, you have a real-time comparison to all your competitors, which is super cool.
Yeah, there's so many scenarios for using data from the outside. The first one is exactly what you're talking about, which is one is completing your picture of reality, because you're realizing that the data you have is only a very small fraction. And this is important, particularly when you're setting goals for yourself. The ability to benchmark yourself against the competition, the industry, is important to realize your full potential. So that's definitely one use case. The other use case that I think is interesting, particularly in industries like medicine, for instance, is the ability to bring people that are part of the same ecosystem, but sometimes they might be competing, so they just otherwise would not be sharing data. And here, creating kind of a neutral platform for them to share information and insights, so they can advance the problem rather than just compete against each other. So we're scratching the surface here on data exchanges. And this radio show I was on, the rise of data exchange led us to a conversation on, is sharing data even enough? Should you be sharing more than data? And I made this joke. I said, the way I think about sharing data, it's kind of like when for your birthday, if I bought you a cash card or a card that has money on it, because I'm essentially giving you an errand. I'm telling you, hey, you know what? Here is $50. Go now buy yourself something. And sometimes with data exchanges, at least the way we've been approaching up until now, they are really just step one is here are some data and go work with it. So ultimately, I think what we want to be able to share is models. We want to be able to share results of analysis that are combining multiple data sets. So we're effectively advancing closer to the impact rather than just sharing raw data. Now, we're step one today because sharing raw data in a live mode without making multiple copies in real time is extremely painful. I think the stats in the market I've seen is, according to Boston Consulting Group, 92% of executives wish their companies shared more data, but then Gartner has a stat saying less than 5% of people are able to trust the data that is being shared. So we got this gigantic gap of people wanting to do it and still not having the process technology to be able to do it. And so for people listening, I think this is, in addition to the data fabric, the data exchanges or the analytics exchanges are technologies to watch out for.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Early on, you were talking about emotions that are important, and there's another really good conversation I had this month with Rana El Kalyubi, who is the CEO or founder of Affectiva, and their mission is to create emotional AI. So the video has just it's a if you I think it's a conversation that I would recommend anyone to watch. Actually, Rana will come onto a LinkedIn Live with me in a few weeks' time. But I had a really good conversation with her and Yashar Bizadi, who is the CEO of Synthesis AI. And what we talked about is not only the importance of developing emotional AI, but also data, in particular synthetic data. So the Synthesis AI is a company that uses technology from film and uses machine learning to create new things like image data. So one of the use cases we talked about was that Affectiva is in particular interested in monitoring drivers in cars. So to monitor that when they're distracted or when they're falling asleep or something like this. And obviously to collect this sort of data, you need a camera at a certain angle. So you need to have the camera on your dashboard or from your rear view mirror. And this is quite unique footage. And then you have, obviously, you want diverse data sets. You want to have all the different ethnic minorities represented. You want to have all genders represented. You want people with hijabs and without. And to create this data would be really expensive to do, because you basically invite people in to drive cars hopefully in a simulator for a very long time. So what they did is they worked with this company, Synthesis AI, who generated millions of images, and they're pixel perfect labeled images. And this for me is another really important area that we need to look at, the important role of synthetic data that can actually help you to tackle some of the biases we have in data. They can create very quickly. So it also democratizes AI on many levels, because any company, any startup can now go and say, can you give me 1,000 labeled images of this in this setting, and it can be created without actually going through the pain of collecting some of this data, which I think is a super cool example and a really fascinating discussion. As I said, I wrote the Forbes article today that came out on the topic, and watched the YouTube video of my conversation with both of them, which I absolutely enjoyed.
Yeah, that's just I was just looking at your Forbes feed. Yeah, this article just came out, and I do think that this is an interesting topic because on one end, you want more data. We always say, more data, better results, and on the other end, you want being able to have reliable data. And so, in the cases of synthetic data, I think what's happening is specifically when historical data is no longer reliable. I mean, it's a perfect example is what we just went through. How much of that data can you really work with in order to help you predict the future? And so, there's this huge opportunity there in creating data to create better insights, for sure. And so I'll make sure to read that piece. I had not read it before we got on this, so I'm sure that there's a lot of nuggets in that. What else happened for you this month here? You've been pretty prolific. I'm looking at your feed
Yes.
here.
No, I
You got a lot going on.
yeah, I've also had a conversation with Arthur D. Little. They are a strategic consulting company, and they did a piece of work on how nations compete on AI. So I wrote a piece on the global AI arms race that is happening in front of our eyes at the moment, where you have major players like the US and China wrangling for first place, and China definitely having a clear ambition to overtake the US when it comes to the use of data and AI. And then you have, we discuss, this is some good statistics in that piece as well, and we look at some of the countries that are moving ahead and others are falling behind. There's a link to their study as well. But we were talking about how other countries like Israel, who've really embraced technology and AI, and really benefiting from this, or countries like Estonia, in Eastern Europe, or countries like Singapore, for example, who are really putting a lot of effort on this. And what we're seeing is that many traditional countries in Europe, for example, seem to be falling behind with this technology. There are countries like Germany and the UK that are keeping pace, but others are really not. And this will have serious implications for everyone living in those countries, for future jobs, for future competitiveness, and for future growth in
So,
in those countries.
when I hear this, I want to learn about the makeup of these countries. What makes them more adept to accept new technology? Because I came up as well with the top, I think the top 20 countries. And you're right, Israel is the number one in terms of being able to incorporate machine learning models in their country and their business. The second one is Holland, and then the third one is the United States. What is unique about I mean, I almost said organization, because here I'm still thinking about the question we talked about earlier, which is, how many data employees do you must have in order to be a data-driven organization? And same question here is that, what does your government need to do? What are the attributes of your country that makes you more adept to adopting technology like that? Any sense, or maybe any hypothesis that you have on that?
Yeah, so I advise a number of governments on this, and what really needs to happen is that they need a data strategy, or they need an AI strategy. So they, or a strategy for implementing those technologies. So I've been involved a little bit in the UK program, for example, and they have, for me, they've created a great strategy for artificial intelligence. So they identified the sectors that they wanted to concentrate on, and the key sector was healthcare, for example, where they said this is a breakout sector. So you need to identify where you feel you have a competitive advantage, where it really helps your country, and then you need to put the resources behind this. So you need to have funding, and governments have huge levers to put funding into those research projects, enabling organizations to create the tools and the infrastructure, and also enabling the whole ecosystem of this to thrive. And at the moment, and you want a good startup culture too in those organizations. And this is something what countries like Israel and Estonia have this really strongly, in Singapore as well, and the US have this. This is, I think, where China is lagging a little bit behind, but they make up for government support on that side. So the government is putting, last time I looked, it was, I believe, 20 times as much resources into AI than the US is doing from a government perspective. So they are very serious about doing, and some of the main players they are supporting very strongly. So if they're making sure companies like Tencent and Alibaba and others are in a position where they can thrive, and they're opening doors towards other countries as well. So I think a good strategy, resources, Then obviously education, I think it needs to link, and this is again part of the UK data strategy, is that they realize that we need talent, we need to grow this. So again, working with the university sector and the education sector to make sure that the right courses are available, the curriculums of existing courses incorporate AI. This is something super important, I think. So for me, they are some of the key levers that we need to put in place. And it all starts with actually awareness at the very top of government, and then the willingness to actually drive this forward.
Last time you and I were somewhere in person, actually, it was in the UK, and I don't know if you remember. I think I might have introduced you to Nina, who was the at the time the chief data officer for the NHS. I think now she is working at a different company. I think she might be working at AXA. But I think one of the key decisions the NHS had made is hire someone who was an executive that was a chief data officer. Often, my conversations with organizations, they ask me, hey, how do I create a culture that's going to enable me to innovate and so forth? And they say, you could have the processes, you could have the technology, you could have the strategy, but ultimately look at your org chart. Because data culture is more than the posters you put on your wall. I mean, that's a great start. It is also the money that you're putting into the initiative. It's also the people, the types of folks that you're putting at the top of the helm of your data strategy, and making sure that it gets executed. We joke that in our book called Drive Business Performance, that often it's not an opinion, or it's not just a guidance that the CEO needs to drive. It's kind of a mandate on how we will make decisions based on data moving forward. I will hire a chief data officer. I will give that person an organization and a budget to drive organizational change. And so often, I know we often talk about, driving a data culture is about the invisible things. I would actually say it's about the very visible things that you do: who you hire, how many people, what type of programs, how they're measuring the efficacy of these programs. There's nothing that's, substitute the very physical, visible changes that you need to make inside the organization in order to apply a true data strategy. And so, when I look at a country like Israel, I think, it's one, the size of the country allows them to get to scale a lot faster than any other country like the United States, or 300 million people. You've got to build the capacity. Where there in Israel, like you said, lots of startups, but also the mass of people is more concentrated in fewer people, and so it's easier to affect. Well, easier. It probably is faster if you wanted to impact change than it would be in any other country. That's why I also think Estonia is a great example, because it's a forward-looking country, fewer people, faster to adopt innovation. It's kind of interesting on the list. I didn't see countries in Africa, but I also think that Africa has an opportunity to leapfrog a lot of other countries that just have legacy they got to work with. Like if you just think about telco infrastructure, for instance, you take a country like France. Well, they were ahead on infrastructure for telco, but now to adopt the new technology, well, they're going to have to decide what they do about their legacy. If you're a young country in Africa, you might not need to worry about that because you didn't have that legacy in the first place. And so it's kind of interesting how technology is going to comes around here and helps countries that might have appeared to be behind and now are going to be in the forefront of technology innovation.
Yeah, I completely agree. And for me, there are very clear parallels between countries and companies, because
Yeah.
we see big legacy organizations that, big traditional organizations with big legacy infrastructure who really struggle to keep up with some of the digital native companies and some of the startups, and this what we're seeing play. This is what's happening on a nationwide scale as well, where small countries like Estonia and Israel, and also the United Arab Emirates, for example.
Mm-hmm.
There's lots of really amazing stuff happening in Dubai. They're building a big city around AI at the moment. Also, Holland is trying to build a big innovation hub. So they are all small countries that have the foresight, and they can do this, and they're rolling technology out. The UAE and Estonia and other countries are using blockchain technology. They now have their health records and their passports on the blockchain, and they just do it, and I love it. And it's it's sometimes frustrating when you realize that it could all be so much better, but it takes such a long time in more traditional countries to make it happen.
You look at population as well. I just pulled up something that I had discovered in January of this year, doing kind of a prediction of what was going to happen, and there was data on what would be what would be the largest countries in 2100. And the prediction for China is that the population of China was actually um, be cut in half by 2100. And so there's a lot of resources in there. I think they were pulling countries from Africa that were showing the growth of population in Africa and the growth of infrastructure. And so some of the countries that we think are ahead today, um, in 90, well, 80 years from now, might be in a completely different situation. And so I think it's helpful when someone made a comment like left to talk about the future of data. If you kind of extend and look out not just to the next decade, but the next 5 or 6 decades, the world for kids and our grandkids might look quite different than what we think it is going to be now.
Absolutely, and they're at the moment we're definitely seeing big power shifts happening. At the moment, you see China emerging as a really strong competitive force across the world, which the US doesn't quite like. But we've always seen this throughout history where if you go right back, we had Egypt as the most advanced country, and if you compare to where they are today, it is that they're definitely not somewhere where you would argue that they're a competitive country. And then you had Italy becoming with the Roman Empire. Then you had Britain, you
Yeah.
had the US. So it's fascinating to see that how in the same way that companies become successful and not so successful, the same happens to countries and nations and cultures.
In fact, I'll maybe this is our last question here. I want to ask you. Let's see, just real trivia. We didn't prepare for this. What is the African country that today has about 200 million people, and will be the second largest country in population in 2100? You want to take a guess?
Nigeria.
Countries. Oh my gosh, you nailed it. I was going to ask the community, but you already nailed it. It is Nigeria. So according to the visualcapitalist.com, it's a site that does predictions like this, and they looked at the top 10 countries by population, and they said in 2017 Nigeria had 206 million people, and in 2100 they're predicted to have 791 million people, the second largest country in the world after India, even bigger than China, which by then is predicted to have 732 million people. And so
Fascinating.
it's
Yeah, so
really interesting. We talked about Egypt, same situation. Egypt in 2017, 96 million people predicted to have in 2100, um, almost 200 million people.
wow. Yeah, it's interesting that the reason I picked Nigeria is that I did a bit of research for some writing I'm doing at the moment on some of the global trends, and I looked at some of the countries that were doing well, and Nigeria was one of them that has actually it has got all the basics in place to become a really successful country. It has lots of young people, lots of entrepreneurial spirit, people that educate themselves. So there's lots of the foundational things are in place for Nigeria to become a very successful country in the future. So very interesting. Lucky,
I don't
lucky.
think we have anyone from Nigeria here. We got people from Martinique here,
Mm.
but we don't have anyone from Nigeria, I think. So I look forward to hearing from them when they join us next time we talk.
Very good. And as always, anyone listening to us, watching us, let us know what you think. Always share your comments, questions, and hope. As I said, we will do this at the end of every month, every last Friday of the month. Bruno and I will get together at the same time to have a little recap of the month. And feel free to contribute. Let us know topics you're interested in. You can reach out to us directly if you think there are certain topics you would like us to discuss in the future. So very good. That's it for today. Anything else to say, Bruno?
You said it all, Bernard. I will talk to you next month.
Very good. Speak to you then. Thank you for joining us, everyone.
Bye
Okay.
bye.
Cheers, Bruno. Bye bye.